is a paper tiger, that its threats don't mean anything. But what we're seeing in Israel and in Lebanon is that at this stage it seems that there has been a massive response, air defense response on both sides of the border to shut down Hezbollah, shut down that Iranian attack. We will see, perhaps in the coming minutes, if any of those ballistic missiles got through this incredible net and caused damage. But
Richard,
just as most people aren't necessarily familiar with ballistic missiles, each one is about the size of a passenger bus.
All right, Richard, stand by there because I want to get a sense of what we're looking at now. We're seeing a picture on our screen from Tel Aviv. You are just over in Lebanon right now. Can you tell me, presumably the inbound missiles are coming from Iran. Are there Hezbollah missiles being fired from where you are?
From where I am, we have mostly been seeing interceptions, high-level explosions, high-level interceptions. We have not heard any launches from this city. We are in southern Lebanon. This is the area that Israel is now trying to create as a buffer zone. This is the area where an Israeli ground offensive is underway, somewhat closer to the Israeli border than we are right now. But this is the Hezbollah stronghold that Israel is trying to dismantle. But from where we are, no, we have not heard any Hezbollah rocket or missile fire leaving from this area. Just these explosions at quite a high altitude, so high that we couldn't hear the impacts, couldn't hear the explosions, but we saw them exploding quite high above us, which is why I believe that this was a very sophisticated weapon system in action to try and stop both the Iranian system or Iranian missiles and anything else that may have been coming toward Israel from Lebanon.
All right, Richard, I'm going to ask you to stand by. Let me go back to Raf Sanchez. Raf, explain where you are. You're still seeing that light show that you had described earlier?
So, Lester, we are just south of the Lebanese border, and I can tell you the skies are once again inky black. We are no longer seeing either what we suspect were those Iranian missiles, nor Israeli Iron Dome interceptors in the skies. It did look from where we were that some of those missiles potentially either impacted in northern Israel or they intercepted and broke apart quite close to the ground. But at this time, the skies are dark. We are not seeing any sign of these missiles. As we said, ballistic missiles, 12 minutes or so, fired from Iran to Israel. We certainly know that Israel's air defenses were in action right now. What we do not know at this point is whether Israeli, American, British, potentially Arab fighter jets across the Middle East had time in that short window to take down any of those incoming ballistic missiles. It is very possible that the lights we saw streaking across the sky were just a fraction of what could have been a much, much larger barrage. I want to tell you, Lester, our colleagues who are in Israel and other parts of, who are in Tel Aviv and other parts of central Israel are telling us that they heard loud explosions where they were. Again, it's not clear if that is a sign of missiles impacting or if that was Iron Dome interceptions happening overhead. I'm looking down at my phone. At this point, we don't have anything official about casualties or impacts from the Israeli military, but I can tell you they gave us just a one-line statement saying sirens sounded all across Israel. You were seeing on your screen the Dome of the Rock in the Old City in Jerusalem, the third holiest site in Islam at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the holiest site for Jews, the Temple Mount. And it appears that the sky is not just over northern Israel, not just over Tel Aviv, but over the holy city of Jerusalem, also earlier filled with missiles as those Iranian projectiles came from the east. So we are waiting at this point to see if there are any reports of injuries, of casualties, of fatalities. But Lester, we are able to cast ahead that the last time this happened in April, it caused minimal damage in Israel, and Israel responded with a very, very small, almost surgical strike against Iran. How Israel decides to respond tonight will be dependent on the scale of the damage caused by these Iranian missiles, something that at this point we are just not able to assess. Lester.
And Raf, so I'm correct, the understanding is that the U.S. was the first to notify Israel of this likely attack tonight.
Yes, that's right, Lester. So the first that Israeli citizens heard of this was the chief spokesman of the Israeli military going up on national television and telling the Israeli public that U.S. intelligence agencies had passed information to their Israeli counterparts that an Iranian missile attack was imminent. Of course, Israel and the United States, military partners, diplomatic partners, but also intelligence partners. There is an enormous flow of information back and forth between the two. And it does appear in this instance it was the United States that first detected this movement inside Iran, indicating an imminent ballistic missile strike. And again, Lester, it does appear that American intelligence was accurate. This was not, as far as we know, a strike involving drones or cruise missiles, which could take hours to reach Israel. This was ballistic missiles. There was just a couple of minutes in between the launch in Iran to them arriving. Lester, I am seeing what appears to be another Iron Dome interceptor in the sky. Apart from that, the skies are quiet. We are not hearing sirens. What is interesting, Lester, in this position, it looks like over Tel Aviv there are more interceptors in action. Now, that could be an indication of a second wave of Iranian missiles, or it could be just some that were further on behind. I can tell you, Lester, from where we are, just a couple of hundred meters from the Lebanese border, we have been hearing outgoing Israeli artillery rounds all evening as Israel fires into southern Lebanon at Hezbollah positions. Those have gone totally silent in the last hour or so, an indication that they seem to have paused those artillery strikes as they brace. Lester, we are once again seeing the skies lighting up now. Many what appear to be these missiles streaking on a straight trajectory towards the southern central section of Israel.
Raf?
And we are seeing the Iron Dome, which fires in a kind of cobra arc, streaking up to intercept them. We are seeing more missiles at this time, Lester.
Yeah, Raf, first of all, and I think you know this, go to shelter if you feel you need to at any point as we watch. We were looking at the other camera from Tel Aviv. We saw a limited number of projectiles there moving the screen, and now we see more here. The sirens are going off. I don't know what they're going off where you are or if we're hearing this from our camera in Tel Aviv. But nonetheless, there appears to be a second round here with the Iron Dome rockets trying to engage. We should go back a year, October 7th, that attack staged from Gaza into Israel. There were simply so many rockets, it overwhelmed the Iron Dome projectiles, and you saw one blow up right there in flight. But as you note, we note that these something still comes down. These projectiles are very heavy. I've seen it for myself. A lot of shrapnel hits the ground, but you see the explosions in the skies. Those would indicate, suggest that those are Iron Dome explosions. And when you hear it, you usually hear a boom and then a boom boom as they are taken out and continue to fall as debris to the ground below. People in Israel have been bracing for this. Again, as Raf has been reporting, the U.S. Intelligence was the first to detect the likely and anticipated launch, notified Israel, and made comments to the press as well that this was likely to occur. A retaliatory attack on a scale that appears to be considerably larger than one we saw in April in retaliation for an Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. This again appears to be two separate barrages. You see now a single weapon going up there, another one coming beneath it. Again, this could be an attempt to overwhelm the defenses of of Israel. In this case, we were told that they would have fighter jets as well that were able to intercept some of these, but it's a fairly short flight time, about 12 minutes from launching pads in Iran to Israel. So not a lot of time to respond here, but a second wave. We're no longer hearing the sirens on the ground, but clearly there's still some activity. Richard Engel is inside Lebanon with a different view for us. Tell us what you're seeing and hearing, Richard.
Well, we are in southern Lebanon, and there is definitely a second wave. We are still seeing it here. And I think based on the reporting that I'm doing, the reporting that Raf is doing just on the opposite side of the border, we're getting a sense of the flight pattern. It seems that some of these ballistic missiles heading toward Israel are going through Lebanese airspace and are being intercepted above Lebanon. So if you watch, we're seeing these high altitude explosions. One just looked up over the. If you miss them, they're very quick. They look like starbursts as the rockets or missiles streak through the sky and then are being intercepted. This second wave, I would say, was as intense as the first wave. They were separated by only a few minutes. This second wave appears to be dying down right now. We'll know much more when we hear from the Pentagon. They are able to look at the satellite imagery. But based on what we're seeing with our own eyes, what Raf is seeing just on the opposite side of the border, what our cameras are capturing, you can get a sense of the direction that these missiles are flying and how many there are. If these are all indeed ballistic missiles, this is a much greater attack than we saw in April, a much larger scale. But so far, it seems that the U.S., Israeli, whoever else might be involved in defending the skies over these two countries seem to be very effective, because for almost every streak that we see coming in one direction, there is another air defense system penetrating it and blowing it up. Lester, these are extraordinary times, and I can't stress that there could be enormous consequences for Iran, enormous consequences for the entire region based on what is happening here, even if these missiles don't get through and cause significant damage in Israel. And you can see another one burning and streaking through the sky right there.
Yeah, some being intercepted, perhaps Iron Dome, perhaps by weapons from fighter aircraft. We'll know at some point. I should point out that the first
alert... It wouldn't be Iron Dome here.
Yeah, of course. And Richard, and I know you have this, and many people who are in Israel have an app on their phones to alert. And I got a couple here. It simply says rocket attack Tel Aviv city center. We got that before that initial wave, and then the sirens went off. But this is a country, of course, that is always on edge to a certain extent for the threats from its neighbors, and in this case, people brace for this retaliatory attack, again coming in multiple waves tonight and far larger than what we witnessed in April. I want to go to our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Kube. Courtney, as we pointed out, the U.S. was aware, intelligence had pointed to the fact there would be an attack tonight. Why did the U.S. want to go out and release that ahead of this?
So it could have been as a potential deterrent. We've seen the U.S. do that in the past, where they put out intelligence, they'll declassify it so that they can potentially deter an action coming. We specifically saw that in Ukraine. Well, it doesn't appear, if that was the motivation here, Lester, it doesn't appear that that's worked. What the U.S. was expecting to see, and I will say, according to conversations that we've been having over the last several hours, this is playing out very similarly to how officials have told us they were expecting it to be. So several hundred ballistic missiles appear to have been launched at Israel. What we've been told all along is the expectation is it would be government and military targets as opposed to civilian facilities or civilian areas. Now, that being said, as you well know, Lester, targeting anything inside Israel always has the potential for some sort of a civilian repercussion. Not only the potential dangers that if something is intercepted, that there could that shrapnel and large pieces could fall on civilians below, but just that the targeting isn't always perfect. Now, we have seen these ballistic missile launches. The U.S. and Israelis and other potential partners in the region have been preparing for this. And in fact, we've talked a lot about April here and the Iranian attack on Israel in April. That was more than 300 projectiles that were fired in waves, various different things, everything from cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, down to slow-moving drones and loitering munitions were fired in over the course of hours. U.S. officials were not expecting this to look exactly like that. They thought this would be primarily ballistic missiles with the potential for some other smaller or even slower systems here. So far, we haven't seen any of those. They also were expecting the majority of the fire to come from Iran. They were not ruling out the possibility of some of the militia groups and proxy groups like the Houthis to fire missiles or other things as well. Again, it's not clear where all of these launches have come from, but the U.S. and allies have been preparing with, in fact, fact, the U.S. military has more assets in the region than they did during that attack in April from Iran. So this includes the U.S. has ground-based and sea-based radars that within seconds of the launch of a ballistic missile, they know that it's in the air and they can get a sense of where it may be impacting so that they can potentially intercept. Israel also has some similar capabilities in the region. So as Raf was saying, it could be minutes from launch to potential impact in Israel, but the U.S. and the Israelis and other allies in the region will know that, and they'll be able to fire off any various kinds of interceptors. The U.S. has ballistic missile destroyers, systems that can fire interceptors, take out these missiles before they even, frankly, get into Israeli airspace in some cases. But the U.S. also has other things in the region, so think about where some of these missiles would be flying over, as we were just hearing from Richard. The U.S. has air defense systems in some of those partner areas in the area, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, that could also have been employed there. And then, of course, there's the air assets that you mentioned, Lester. They have U.S. fighter jets, frankly, all throughout the region. They've even bolstered some of those capabilities in recent days and weeks. They have the ability to shoot down some of these projectiles as they are coming in. It really was a layered defense here that exists. But again, we're still waiting for any kind of a battle damage assessment, any sense of how many may have been fired here, whether any were able to actually impact in Israel, and how much the U.S. and allies were able to shoot down and with what assets. But again, looking back to April, the U.S. has only bolstered their capabilities that we saw back then, Lester.
Yeah, and Courtney, on that point, does the U.S. leave on the table the possibility of launching its own retaliatory attack directly on Iran, or is that off the table?
Nothing is off the table here, but I think, again, looking back to April, Israel was the one who responded with strikes inside Iran, you'll recall. Just based off of the language that we've been hearing, not even just in the last hours, but over the last months, the U.S. is very quick to say that they will defend Israel. But at the end of the day, I could see more of an Israeli response here against Iran than a U.S. one, Lester.
All right, Courtney, thank you. As you look at the screen there on your left, Tyre, Lebanon, a little after 8 in the evening. This is very close to the Israeli border. On the right, that's the view from Tel Aviv. Notable in both pictures right now, the skies appear to be calm after what appeared to be 2 waves of attacks of either rockets or ballistic missiles or a combination of both. I want to go to our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what is the White House position? What's happening right now in the West Wing?
Hi there, Lester. Well, it's been a busy morning here at the White House. The president was briefed early this morning, and just a short time ago, we heard that the president had convened a meeting of his national security team along with the vice president to discuss the status of U.S. preparations in the region and also the status of helping Israel defend against attack and protect U.S. personnel. Now, on that point, Lester, earlier today, the State Department had directed all U.S. government employees and their family members in Israel and the surrounding areas to shelter in place. Now, earlier today, we had heard from a senior White House official that the Biden administration did anticipate that this attack could include more firepower than the attack that you were discussing with Courtney in April. At this point, it appears that is the case. But Lester, I also want to point to a full statement from a senior White House official that we were given earlier today. And the final line of that statement says a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. So that is the question right now, Lester. How will the U.S., if at all, respond to it? Or as Courtney was saying, if they'll allow Israel to primarily respond to this. But it's been a difficult tightrope to walk for the Biden administration over the last few weeks. The president has been asked repeatedly what his response is to the incursions by Israel into Lebanon. And he has repeatedly said that he would like to see a ceasefire here, while at the same time emphasizing the need for Israel to defend itself. So the White House walking a very tightrope here politically, Lester.
All right, Gabe, thank you. What you're looking at was video taken a little bit ago of some of those rockets and/or ballistic missiles descending toward Israel. We saw a lot of explosions in the sky indicating they had been intercepted, but of course that doesn't stop debris and in some cases lethal debris from falling to the ground. And you can see one of the interceptors launching on the left. They're trying to take out these missiles before they can do maximum damage. Let me bring in Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker. Kristen, we've been talking from a military angle what the U.S. can do and what it might do, but this is also a political question. Can you talk about that for us?
Well, Lester, think about the extent to which this may reshape the debate tonight between the vice presidential candidate, Senator J.D. Vance, and Governor Tim Walz. Foreign policy will now be in focus, and the crisis in the Middle East specifically. Former President Donald Trump already out with a statement saying, quote, "The world is on fire and spiraling out of control. We have no leadership, no one running the country." That will clearly be a theme that we will hear from Senator J.D. Vance on the debate stage tonight when both candidates are pressed on what they would do in an administration to deal with what is unfolding right now. Here's the thing, though, Lester. It will put the Trump foreign policy in the Middle East in focus. It will put the Biden foreign policy in the Middle East in focus. Remember, under former President Donald Trump, he ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, said he would get a better deal. That never happened. U.S. officials now saying Iran is closer to developing a nuclear weapon in the wake of that. So all of this will be at play, and again, I think reshape the conversation, not just on the debate stage, Lester, but on the campaign trail as well. And think about how much foreign policy has really come into the spotlight in the wake of the October 7th attacks a year ago. So obviously, it will be yet again another flashpoint tonight, Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you. Let me bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, once more from Tyre, Lebanon. Richard, I understand there's been some reaction, some statement from the Iranians.
The Iranians have just issued a statement explaining why they launched this response. Iran, just a short while ago, said that this attack, which it launched at the heart of the enemy, was Iran's response to Israel's killing of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed, assassinated by Israel in Tehran, and that this was also the response to the Israel's, again, killing of the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, a few days ago, and another Iran Revolutionary Guard leader. So this, Iran says, is its combined response to the killing of several of its allied leaders, several leaders of Iranian proxies. So we're now seeing what Iran's justification for this attack was, and Iran said if Israel responds, it will face a crushing assault, a crushing defeat. So Iran is saying why it did it and threatening to respond with more attacks should Israel choose to respond. And I'm very confident that Israel will choose to respond to this. The only question is how severe that response will be.
Richard, thank you. Two waves of inbound missiles and rockets that we've witnessed here this evening, broken up by about 5 or 6 minutes. This is the pictures from a bit earlier. We've been watching the skyline of Tel Aviv, also that view from where Richard is in Tyre, Lebanon, to see if this is the end of this attack and the defense. We don't know if there have been any casualties. We saw what appeared to be a number of these rockets or missiles make ground impact, or at least appear to make ground impact. Could be just they hit very low to the ground. But a number of them also appear to have been intercepted either by the Iron Dome, which is famously used by Israel, or fighter aircraft or other forms of interceptors used to defend Israel from this attack. It's hard to know exactly where these are landing. Let's go to Raf Sanchez right now. Raf, are you getting any word, any indication of casualties or what has been hit tonight?
Texting with the Israeli military spokesman, he is saying that there have been sirens going off basically all across this country, that nearly all 9 million people inside Green Line Israel have been told at various points to head to shelters. At this moment, there is no word on impacts or casualties. The Israeli military is advising the public that the explosions they've been hearing are either interceptions or the sounds of missiles hitting in the earth. So they seem to be, oh, Lester, there is an Iron Dome fairly close to us now. All right, Lester, that's the sirens. We're going to head to safety.
All right.
Go.
Raf Sanchez, thank you very much. The sirens, this is the third time we have heard them sound tonight after what appear to be 2 waves of attacks. We can't see, I don't know if that camera can move, but we're watching right now. Clearly, Raf and his team heard the sirens, and they have a designated place to go to take shelter, as most people do in that part of the world. This picture right now appears quiet. I'm going to just pause and see if we can hear anything.
Line. So it doesn't look like it's coming from beyond the city limits or beyond the suburb.
Okay, we don't hear anything in terms of the sirens. Let me go to Richard Engel. Richard's on the other side of the border in Tyre, Lebanon. Richard, you've been watching this, I guess, from the edge of these attacks. Are you seeing or hearing something new?
No, we saw 2 distinct waves, both of them intense. I would say now, with the distance of a little bit of time, both the first wave and the second wave appear to have been roughly equivalent, both intense. They were separated only by a few minutes. Courtney talked to you earlier about all of the different missile defense systems that the United States and Israel have. And I would say, just looking at what we've seen over the sky and having covered a few wars before, that many different missile defense systems were in operation tonight. And initially, it seems that they were extraordinarily effective. Israel, the United States were prepared for this. And I think if there had been an enormous amount of damage, a huge casualty count, we would already know at this stage. So I think after this, assuming that this is done, we don't know if it's done, but Iran, has already issued its statement explaining what happened and saying that there will be threats if Israel responds. That does indicate to a degree that it might be over for now, but this is a historic moment. We will look back on this, I believe, in the days and months to come, and see this as an inflection point. April came and went. Israel responded in a symbolic way, and the tit-for-tat exchange between Israel and Iran ended there. But when you listen to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, when you listen to what he told Congress a few months ago, what he said to the UN just a few days ago, his speech directly to the Iranian people yesterday, it seems that Israel is and Prime Minister Netanyahu is much more likely to respond in a more severe way than he did in April, and we will see. We are still watching here, but for now, it does appear that this Iranian barrage is over, or at least paused.
Richard, there has been so much talk in the last few weeks about trying to avert a regional war. Obviously, Iran has said things that suggest it doesn't want a regional war. How will that be measured in terms of the intensity of this attack, whether this becomes something bigger than what we're seeing now?
So we are already clearly in a regional war, and in many ways we've been in a regional war from the beginning. A year ago, Hamas launched its massacre from Gaza. Hamas is backed by Iran. Hamas knew from personal experience that firing rockets and missiles at Israel is often not very effective, because Israel has such intense and robust missile defense system. So what Hamas did on October 7th was breach the barrier. It broke down through the fences around Gaza Strip and carried out close quarter attacks, atrocities, and carried out a massacre on an unprecedented scale in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is going on right now, however, is that as Israel wraps up the Gaza war at an enormous cost to the people of Gaza. It is focusing its attention in the north here on Hezbollah. What Iran has just done is launch this attack to try and protect its allies, to try and protect itself, to try and protect its own image, because Iran's proxies are being wiped out one after the other. First, it lost Hamas, or has mostly lost Hamas. Now it is losing Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still robust. It still has tens of thousands of fighters. But Iran it feels that it had to respond with this air campaign. Will this now lead to a new stage of war? And I think now the ball is squarely in the United States and Israel's court when it chooses how to respond to an attack. And again, we don't have a full picture. We don't have a full battle assessment, but to what seems to have been a not very effective barrage air campaign from Iran.
All right, Richard, we'll ask you to stand by. We need to go back to NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez. Raf, you had to run into shelter there as the siren sounded. Everything okay?
Everything okay, Lester. So we just had the experience that many millions of people across Israel had, that the sirens went off at our position. We had a couple of seconds to run to the shelter here. I can tell you our team here are all safe. Now, Lester, what was striking is we have been somewhat observers, bystanders almost, of this Iranian missile barrage as it appeared to target central Israel. We've been looking south, watching the sky illuminated, and then just, a couple moments ago, for the first time, an Iron Dome going off from just east of our position here near the Israel-Lebanon border. It went at a very sharp and low trajectory. I don't have any confirmation, but just based on the direction that interceptor was fired, it seems possible to me that rather than intercepting an Iranian missile, given that we just haven't seen any now for about 15 minutes, it seems possible to me that that Iron Dome was fired at something that was coming from the Lebanese border behind us. Again, that is not confirmed, but just based on the trajectory of the Iron Dome, it seems possible. And if that is the case, it is a potential sign that Hezbollah, despite being under intense pressure from Israeli ground forces, Israeli artillery fire, and Israeli aircraft, were, at least in some limited way, trying to join this large-scale barrage of Israel. And again, Lester, I should say that is not confirmed. What is confirmed is a spokesperson for the Israeli Airport Authority is saying that Israel's airspace is closed. Flights are directed to find alternate routes outside of Israel. And Lester, that is a sign of how intense this barrage has been. Even on some of the most intense days when rockets were flying out of Gaza in large numbers, Israel prided itself on keeping the flights going in and out of Ben Gurion Airport. There is only one really major international airport in this country. And when it is closed, Israel feels very, very cut off from the world. They go to enormous lengths to keep that airport open. But I can tell you tonight, in the face of what seems to be potentially several hundred Iranian ballistic missiles, the airport is closed, the airspace is closed. It is not clear when it will reopen, but I think it is safe to assume that Israeli fighter jets remain in the skies above us in case there is a third wave of incoming Iranian missiles.
All right, Raf, it's good to hear from you. Glad to know you and your team are safe. Let me ask you to stand by as I bring in Jeremy Bash, a former chief of staff at the CIA and the Pentagon. Jeremy, how fine a line is the U.S. walking tonight as it supports Israel's right to defend itself but doesn't become too deeply engaged in all this?
Well, the United States and Israel have been allies for 75 years. And so tonight, when our ally is under attack, we come to their defense, and we've said pretty clearly on a bipartisan basis across administrations, we've got Israel's back. We're going to give them what they need to defend themselves. Of course, some of the systems that you see illuminating the sky tonight, including Iron Dome, were jointly developed with U.S. technology. But more importantly, U.S. fighter jets are in the air. U.S. Aegis destroyers and cruisers are activated tonight to knock out ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles. And U.S. Patriot missile batteries, anti-missile batteries, are also activated undoubtedly across Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and other places in the Arabian Gulf to ensure that Israel and our allies and our bases and our troops are protected from this Iranian onslaught. I've just got to say here, on the eve of the Jewish high holidays, with our ally under attack, with United States having been attacked ourselves, our bases, our troops. We lost 3 troops earlier in the year from an Iranian attack. This is a big moment of consequence, and I know that the United States will not only support our ally, but will continue to provide intelligence, will continue to provide warning, will continue to provide capability, air defenses, missile defenses. I think the question you're asking, Lester, is to what extent will the United States participate in an offensive strike against the Iranian mainland in the aftermath of that? We don't know. I think it's too early to tell. We've got to do the bomb damage assessment. We've got to understand what capability Iran still has, what threats they still pose, and there certainly are going to be some back-channel diplomacy to try to figure out whether or not Iran feels deterred. If they don't feel deterred, and if they continue to threaten our allies, our partners, and our bases, we may very well get involved ourselves.
Yeah, and that leads to the question, what does retaliation look like if the Israelis decide to respond very quickly to what we're witnessing here tonight? What might it look like?
Well, they could put up their aircraft, their F-35s, their F-16s up over the skies and take out Iranian missile positions. They could take out Iranian military assets. You know, Israel might conclude, let's not waste the crisis. We've been attacked. The skies over Tel Aviv are full of ballistic missiles inbound. You see them landing right there on the beach. They're in a heavily populated area. The entire population of Israel is in a bomb shelter at this hour. I'm talking to Israelis as we speak by WhatsApp to try to figure out where they are. And so the Israeli military might say, let's not waste this crisis. Let's go out and try to really degrade some of Iran's capabilities and get that deterrence back. You know, Israel's been launching these attacks against Hezbollah leadership, and they've been kind of waiting to see Hezbollah's response, and it hasn't come. They killed Nasrallah, and nothing happened. They killed the next tier down, nothing happened. They went after, as you referenced, Hania in downtown Tehran, one of the masterminds of Hamas, the leaders of Hamas, the masterminds of October 7th, and nothing happened. So Israel is feeling, I think, pretty emboldened that they can take out Iran's terrorist surrogates and proxies, and they may have to go directly after Iranian mainland targets as well.
All right, Jeremy, thank you. I'll ask you to hang in there for us. I want to go to our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez now. Gabe, we understand the president has been observing this and coordinating the American response from the Situation Room.
Yeah, that's right, Lester. We're just hearing from the White House. The president and the vice president are in the Situation Room right now, according to U.S. officials. And the president did direct U.S. resources to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and shoot down missiles targeting Israel. Now, Lester, we had earlier heard from U.S. officials and the president a short time ago that the U.S. did consider this a, quote, significant attack. And now, as we see it unfold, there are so many questions here with what happens next and what will be the U.S. response here. Now, Lester, let's take a big step back here. And if you can think, we are nearly a year to the one-year anniversary of October 7th. And it was the day after October 7th that President Biden first went before the cameras and warned other countries in that region, whether it be Iranian proxies or Iran, not to turn this into a wider war. And here we are nearly 1 year later, and these developments in the Middle East is something that President Biden and his administration truly did not want to see. And as I mentioned earlier, they continue to walk this very fine line of not wanting to have this develop into a wider war, but also saying that they want to see a ceasefire here, but always emphasizing that Israel has the right to defend itself. The White House officials did not wish to comment just several days ago when those first reports emerged of exploding walkie-talkies in Lebanon. The White House has refused to criticize Israel for any of the actions that it has taken in Lebanon. So, again, right now we are waiting for more reaction from the White House. The president, one of his events this afternoon has been canceled as U.S. officials monitor this. And again, the White House, the president and the vice president are monitoring developments right now from the Situation Room. Lester.
All right, Richard, thank you. Let me bring in again Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel in Tyre, Lebanon. Richard, we've been watching these attacks coming presumably from Iran. Have you seen anything outbound from Lebanon that could be indication that Hezbollah has joined this immediate fight?
It is very possible. We haven't seen any launches from this area where we are specifically. Most of the interceptions we have seen have been at very high altitude, suggesting a ballistic missile. The reason a ballistic missile is called a ballistic missile is it flies at extraordinarily high altitudes and then follows a ballistic pattern and falls to the sky. Generally, the rockets and some missiles, but mostly the rockets that Hezbollah fires are much flatter, they're much lower, they're much smaller. If a rocket might be the size of a flagpole, a ballistic missile roughly the size of a passenger bus. So much, much more explosive power. And what we saw tonight appears to have been many, many ballistic missiles in two distinct waves. Unclear how much of that, if any of that, was coming from Lebanese territory, certainly coming through Lebanese territory, but it would not be surprising at all if Hezbollah was also involved in this, because the attack was carried out in the name of the slain Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, in the name of the assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, and also in the name of an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander. So Iran said that its attacks were to protect its reputation and protect its proxies, its allies, partly to show its credibility. Now, how much of a price will it pay for this show of force?
All right, Richard, we continue to scan the skies. We've seen 2 waves of attacks. We don't know that this is over, and no one does right now, in Israel, in a night in which they have seen a large-scale attack by Iranian forces coming in the form of ballistic missiles. As Richard described, these are heftier, larger, more lethal missiles, and perhaps some rockets. You see some of the blasts in the air that would indicate these particular weapons have been intercepted, but still coming down in pieces across many areas. It's hard to get a sense of the distance here, or where these rockets are being intercepted from, whether these are landing on heavily populated areas. It is simply too soon to know. But I want to go back to Raf Sanchez, who has been with us since these projectiles started raining from the sky quite a while ago now. Raf?
Lester, time becomes a slippery thing in moments like this, but I would say it has been about 20 minutes or so now since we were able to see any sign of Iranian ballistic missiles from our position in northern Israel. Speaking to colleagues who are in central Israel, in Tel Aviv, it does appear quiet there as well. But if there were 2 waves, there could be a 3rd wave. I've just been texting with an Israeli military official. I asked, does it look like the attack is over? The official says, too early to say. But we are expecting the chief spokesman for the Israeli military, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, to address the public potentially any minute now. That could be an indication that the Israeli military feels confident enough to give a new statement that they feel that this is over, but we will have to wait and see what they officially say at this point. I can tell you, Lester, this has certainly felt like a far, far more intense attack than the one we saw in April. Just the sheer volume of missiles. They arrived so quickly. They seem to have set off the sirens all across this country, and we simply do not know at this stage what proportion of them were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defenses, by its jets in the air, and by American warplanes. But Lester, this is certainly another historic night in a year of historic nights, and I think in the White House, across the Middle East, people will be holding their breath as Israel examines the scale of the damage. And then all eyes will be on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his security cabinet, and the leadership of the Israeli military as they decide how, when, and at what scale to respond. Lester.
Okay, Raf, thank you. Let's bring in Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker. Kristen, what kind of reaction is eliciting now at the Capitol?
We are starting to get reaction from lawmakers, Lester. Let me share a little bit of it with you. Senator Marco Rubio saying large-scale, not symbolic missile attack from Iranian regime against Israel. A large-scale Israeli retaliatory response inside Iran is certain to follow. That's significant because Senator Rubio is essentially making the point, and Courtney spoke to this earlier, that he believes that any response should come from Israel. A different message coming from Senator Lindsey Graham, known for being hawkish on foreign policy. He says this is a moment of choosing for the free world regarding Iran. The Ayatollah and Iranian regime are religious Nazis who want to destroy the state of Israel. Their words, not mine. They want to purify Islam and attack the United States. Again, their words, not mine. The missile attack against Israel should be the breaking point, and I would urge the Biden administration to coordinate an overwhelming response with Israel, starting with Iran's ability to refine oil. That's significant, Lester, that final sentence, because Senator Lindsey Graham has said if Iran escalates this conflict in the Middle East, that the United States should consider a coordinated attack against Iran's oil refineries. That would undoubtedly be a major escalation of this conflict overall if the United States were to get involved in that way. Again, Senator Lindsey Graham, and you see the difference between the language that he's using and Senator Marco Rubio is using, choosing their words very carefully. So that clearly is a dividing line in the Republican Party. What will the candidates say about this? Again, we're just hours away from the vice presidential debate. What will Senator J.D. Vance, for example, say? Will he lean into that line of attack, that more needs to be done, that the United States should coordinate a response with Israel? So certainly significant. And this is where I believe the dividing line is going to be as it relates to not just the debate tonight, but the conversation, Lester, on the campaign trail right now. Polling shows that Vice President Kamala Harris, by 1 point, gets higher marks when it comes to who would be the better commander-in-chief. But this is a commander-in-chief moment. This is a moment of testing for each of these candidates, and undoubtedly that will be on display tonight on the debate stage, Lester.
All right, Kristen, thank you. We received word as you were speaking from the Iranian mission to the United Nations, and the message they're sending is that this is over. This series of attacks tonight we've been watching over. We'll, of course, to see how that plays out, but that's what we're hearing from the Iran mission to the United Nations. We want to go to senior White House correspondent. Let's go to Richard Engel right now. He's in Tyre, Lebanon. You just heard that statement that the Iranians say this is over. Is this a symbol that they're being very careful, not wanting to escalate this any farther?
Well, I think they crossed that Rubicon about an hour ago, and there will be, this is an escalation, and there will be a response. But Iran, according to its mission at the United Nations, says that it is over. And I'm quoting the statement, which was posted on X. It says, Iran's legal, rational, and legitimate response to the terrorist acts of the Zionist regime, which involve targeting Iranian nationals' interests and infringing upon national sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has been duly carried out. So Iran is saying, for now, that this was a response, that it was a legal and rational and legitimate response, and that it is over. But this is certainly not over. This conflict, it may only be entering a new phase right now. But Iran says that the barrage that we saw here in southern Lebanon, that they saw all across Israel, that phase, according to this statement from the Iranian regime, is over.
Richard, thank you. Let me go back now to Raf Sanchez. Raf, we're hearing from the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, that they are not seeing any further threats out there tonight. Is that the sense you're getting?
That's right, Lester. As we speak, the chief spokesman for the Israeli military is on national television. He is saying at this moment they do not see any more threats of aerial attacks. He is advising Israeli citizens it is now safe to leave their bomb shelters. So that is the Israeli military appearing to echo the Iranian government that this intense attack involving ballistic missiles does appear to be over. The spokesman saying this attack will have consequences. Now, Lester, this is all still very preliminary, but we do also have a statement from the Magan David Adom. It is Israel's sort of national emergency ambulance service. They are saying that at this time, again, this is a preliminary report, there are no reports of injuries as a direct result of missile impacts in Israel. They are saying that there are 2 light injuries reported as a result of shrapnel interceptions overhead, shrapnel falling to the ground. 2 people lightly injured in Tel Aviv, they are saying. They're also saying there are a number of minor injuries where people fell or hurt themselves in the process of running to the shelters. But Israel's emergency services at this point are saying no reports of fatalities and no reports of injuries as a direct result of missile impacts. Now, if that remains the case, it is almost miraculous feeling, just given the extent of the missile fire, those deadly shooting stars we saw streaking through the night sky here minute after minute. But the initial report at this time is no fatalities caused as a result of these missiles, and that will be a major, major factor as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the leadership of this country decide how to respond to this second large-scale Iranian missile attack in just 6 months. Lester.
Okay, Raph, thank you. Let me go to our Pentagon correspondent. I'm sorry, Raph, you hearing something there?
Lester, we heard an explosion. There has been outgoing artillery fire from around here. That did not sound like it. That seemed like an interception. I didn't see anything. I'm looking at my crew here. Neither of them are seeing anything either. Again, we're just about 2 miles from the Lebanese border, so it is possible in these extraordinary days we are seeing here in the Middle East that that explosion you just heard may have nothing to do with the Iranian ballistic missile attack and may instead be something to do with incoming fire, mortars, rockets coming from Lebanon. The sirens are not going off here. That did sound close, but it may very well have been on the other side of that mountain ridge which separates Israel from southern Lebanon here. Lester.
Okay, Raph, thanks for clearing that up. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Kube. Courtney, is the U.S. now detailing its level of involvement in defending Israel tonight?
So we don't have specifics yet. We know what's there that the U.S. military could have used to help, but we do know now, according to a defense official, that the U.S. military did help with the intercept of some of these projectiles that we're seeing that came in over Israel tonight. Now, among the ways that the U.S. could have helped would be, number one, detecting those missiles. Remember, the U.S. has sea and land-based radars throughout the region that can detect a ballistic missile launch within seconds, and then they even have systems that can help determine where that missile is coming, the apogee, the trajectory, that they can help to intercept it. Israel has some of those capabilities as well, but the U.S. would likely have helped with that, the detection of the missiles, and then in the shooting down, the U.S. has, again, both land and sea-based assets, so we're talking about ballistic missile destroyers in the region that have the ability to intercept a missile as it's coming in. They also have air defense systems that are land-based, like the Patriot system, also in the region. And then, of course, they would have their air systems. So they would have jets that would have the ability to fly in the region. The U.S. has known for hours that this was possible. These strikes were possible to happen, and they had a decent sense of the potential time frame as well. They likely would have had aircraft up in the air to help with intercepts if necessary. We don't, again, know which of those systems, which of those assets were used in this case, but we do know that the U.S. was involved in knocking some of those down. Now, we heard from the White House earlier today in the form of a statement and then also in the form of a tweet that President Biden did direct the Pentagon to help with the defense of Israel. But again, we're still working on some of the details of exactly what was used. Back in April, you'll recall, Lester, more than 300 projectiles fired from Iran towards Israel. The U.S. was involved in knocking down many of those projectiles at that time. And now the U.S. only has more assets in the region able to do that, Lester.
All right, Courtney, thanks very much again. We have seen nothing further in terms of missiles or rockets being aimed toward Israel. Both sides, Iran, Israel, saying that they're not seeing anything further. Iran saying that it has concluded its attacks tonight. That word coming short time ago from their UN mission here in New York. Let me bring in Jeremy Bash now, a former chief of staff at the CIA and the Pentagon. Give us the 35,000-foot view now of where this is going.
Well, probably about 150 ballistic missiles fired on Israel As you saw, several of them got through over the skies of Tel Aviv, and Israel's air defense's Iron Dome had to be put in action to knock out some of those missiles. We don't have any reports of fatalities or serious casualties on the ground. There was a terrorist attack in the southern part of Tel Aviv in Jaffa earlier tonight. There's several dead reported from Israeli police. Israelis have spent the evening in bomb shelters. And of course, there continues to be other fire from Houthis, from Hezbollah. And so this feels, Lester, like a very serious, significant attack against Israel by Iran and its surrogates and proxies. Now, again, Israel has some decision space here. If there were no serious fatalities or casualties, it can kind of measure its response if it chooses to, or it could maybe determine that it doesn't want to waste the crisis and actually launch a much more significant strike on Iran's mainland. The U.S. participated, probably with another coalition, as we saw in April, in the air defense of Israel, using probably F-16s, F-15s, our Aegis ballistic missile defense systems, and our Patriot missile defense systems in the region. That's a show of force to Iran that the United States is going to continue to have Israel's back. So again, this war is expanding because Iran has wanted to expand. They've wanted to open a northern front against Israel. They've unleashed Hezbollah. You've seen Israel response. And now this is the second time in several months that Iran has launched missile attacks against our ally Israel.
All right, Jeremy, thanks very much. And again, as was reported here, at least Israeli officials saying there have been no serious injuries related to anything that's occurred tonight in terms of this attack from Iran. However, Raf Sanchez, let me turn back to you. We understand there was violence that may or may not be linked to all this in Tel Aviv tonight.
Yeah, Lester. So in those anxious hours before the Israeli military, or excuse me, after the Israeli military spokesman told the public here that an attack was imminent, and before the attack actually got underway, there was a shooting in the Jaffa area that's south of downtown Tel Aviv. And Israeli police are saying at least 4 civilians were killed by at least 2 gunmen who appear to have opened fire on the light rail in southern Tel Aviv. Now, U.S. officials are saying the overall death toll may be higher still, maybe closer to 8 or 9. But while it appears, according to the Israeli military, that no one was killed as a result of these Iranian missile attacks, it appears that there are at least 4 people killed in this shooting attack. It looks, according to some of the images we're starting to see, like one of the gunmen was armed with some kind of semi-automatic rifle, appears to have opened fire on one of these light rail trains and then continued shooting on the platform after disembarking. Israeli police are saying both of the suspects are dead. There are a number of wounded people. Their conditions are unclear. So while it may be that Israel has got through this night without anyone killed as a result of these Iranian missiles, it is not the case that no one has died a violent death in Israel tonight. And it just goes to show you, Lester, just the unbelievably heightened tensions all across the Middle East. We do not know the motivation of these shooters at this point, but it is hard to believe that it is totally unrelated to the massive loss of life that we have been seeing all across the region these last 11 months. Lester.
Okay, Raf, thanks. Let's go back to the other side of the border, inside Lebanon. Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent. Richard, there's a story being written here tonight about the future relations of Israel to its northern neighbor.
Well, if you listen to Israel, if you listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he is describing a future relations. He held out a map at the United Nations a couple of days ago, and he said that there is a future for the Middle East that doesn't involve the Iranian government, that doesn't involve its proxies, that doesn't involve what is here locally referred to as the axis of resistance. And that's the narrative that Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying about the future of the Middle East. But from the narrative inside Israel is also changing right now. A year ago, almost exactly a year ago, Israel suffered a a tremendous intelligence catastrophe and a total security collapse on October 7th. Its deterrent capacity was shattered. The Israeli public were demoralized to a degree. People couldn't understand how a country like Israel, which has such robust defenses, could have suffered and not foreseen the Hamas atrocity of October 7th. With these two missile attacks launched by Iran, both of them shut down entirely. And if the reporting that Raf is getting holds up, the fact that not a single fatality was caused by all of this incoming fire, that will go a long way to allowing Israel to reestablish its credibility, to reestablish its deterrence, to reestablish its security reputation across this entire region. And that is something that is valuable to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and is something that is valuable to Israel. It wants the region to know that it has this kind of capacity. Now, I keep saying, what will happen next? I do not suspect that this will go like it did in April, unchallenged. In April, there was a symbolic response from Israel. We will see tonight. There will be many diplomatic calls. There will be many calls to Israel. But we will see if Israel again responds in such a symbolic way as it did in April, or if this is a start of a new chapter, perhaps a new chapter leading in the direction of what Prime Minister Netanyahu has been describing, a Middle East that does not have the threats posed by the Iranian government and its proxies, including Hezbollah, which dominates this part of South Lebanon where I am right now.
Yeah, and let's talk about where you are in South Lebanon. We haven't really talked much about the events of the last couple of days in terms of the Israelis now pushing in on the ground, limited ground raids, trying to create a buffer zone. If I'm not mistaken, where you are right now would be inside that buffer zone.
Yes, it would be. So what Israel has been doing, and it is all connected, it is all part of this project to defang Iran, to defang its proxies, first by going after Hamas in Gaza, the people of Gaza paying an enormous price because, unlike Lebanon, Gaza is closed off. So the civilians in there had no ability to evacuate. Across the border where I am in Lebanon, it is a country. It has an airport that is still functioning. It has an open border, more or less, with Syria. There have been many refugees who've been going into Syria. But what Israel has declared is it wants to eliminate Hezbollah, at least from southern Lebanon, to push Hezbollah back from the Israeli border to the Litani River. We are just south of the Litani River, so yes, we're in that area that would be the buffer zone. And Israel has been attacking Hezbollah systematically using high tech, using intelligence, doing that sabotage attack, blowing up first Hezbollah's pager system. The reason Hezbollah used pagers was so that they could avoid iPhones. They tried to use low-tech technology. Israel figured it out, infiltrated the shipments, put bombs in the pagers, blew them up. Then did the same thing with the walkie-talkies. Again, an intelligence coup. What Israel wants to do now is go after the fighters themselves. They've taken out the communication system. They've taken out much of the leadership, but the army of Hezbollah, the fighters of Hezbollah still remain. Israel pushed into southern Lebanon yesterday, just a few hundred, staying quite close to the border. But for now, it doesn't seem that Hezbollah has engaged. Hezbollah didn't want to confront Israeli troops head on, perhaps trying to save their numbers, perhaps now feeling a leadership crisis. They didn't take the bait of going after Israel when Israel is going in with so much force. They're holding back, at least for now, on the ground here. But this is still more or less day one of Israel's ground war into Lebanon.
Okay, Richard, thank you. Let me go to our senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez. What is the stature right now at the White House, and do they think this is over for the time being?
Well, we don't have any immediate reaction in the last few minutes, Lester, to these recent developments and the comments from Iran. But what we can tell you, as we reported earlier, the president and the vice president were in the Situation Room as of just a short time ago, monitoring these developments. And Lester, this is a huge test of President Biden's foreign policy. A lot of questions will be raised about how much leverage the president has over Israel, and that's been discussed over the last few months. Now, the The Biden administration has repeatedly said that because of President Biden and his discussions with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that civilian casualties have been limited down in Gaza. It will be a very difficult couple of days for the Biden administration to now see what happens next with Israel and how it can prevent this from escalating even further. Now, we just heard from the White House a short time ago that the president did direct U.S. resources to help defend the skies over Israel. There's a White House briefing that was scheduled for this afternoon that has just been pushed back, obviously, as these developments are unfolding. We hope to get more information from the White House in the next few minutes, perhaps, on exactly the extent of the role the U.S. played this afternoon as it helped defend Israel against this Iranian attack. And again, Lester, as far as we know, the president and the vice president with their national security team are continuing to monitor this from the Situation Room. As Kristen mentioned earlier, Lester, this is sure to become a major issue in the campaign. Just a few moments ago, we have had former President Trump weigh in on all this, saying, quote, "This war was totally preventable. It should never have happened." So again, something that was sure to be a focus tonight during the vice presidential debate, Lester.
All right, let's go right to Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Walker, for more on that. Kristen, we are going to see this debate tonight. Was foreign policy prior to this going to be a big part of it, you suspect?
Lester, I think that foreign policy would have been a significant part of the debate, even if this hadn't happened, simply because the Middle East has been in this state, quite frankly, for days, waiting to see if Iran would retaliate. And now here we are with this escalation. And so, as Gabe just laid out, the line of attack from former President Trump, likely from Senator J.D. Vance, is going to be that this wouldn't have happened if he were in office. Of course, there's no evidence of that. There's nothing to say that anything would be different. But that's the line of attack that we are hearing from former President Trump. And of course, it does come when you talk to U.S. officials. They say, look, we have more military assets in the region than we have had in years. Of course, Courtney was speaking to some of that. And they also note that it was Trump who ripped up the Iran nuclear deal when he was in office, vowing to get what he called a better deal. That never happened. So there are going to be questions for both of these candidates. And of course, J.D. Vance, Governor Walz will be making the case tonight for each of the candidates at the top of the ticket. The issue of the war in the Middle East, Lester, has loomed over the Biden-Harris administration. When President Biden was at the top of the ticket, it really was dragging down his support in some key areas, like the state of Michigan, for example. They have wanted to see a ceasefire. They argue that the death toll in Gaza is simply too high, that this is a humanitarian crisis. So incredibly difficult questions now, Lester, to be answered on that debate stage tonight and on the campaign trail.
All right, Kristen, and you'll be joining us for our coverage of the debate later this evening, and we'll talk more about this. Let's bring in NBC's Aaron McLaughlin in Jerusalem. Aaron, we knew you had to take shelter there with your team at some point. Now that you're out and about, any signs of damage or impact in Jerusalem where you are?
Well, not here in Jerusalem, Lester. An uneasy calm has settled over this city. It was around 6:30 p.m. I was actually live reporting on the apparent terror attack that had unfolded, according to Israeli officials, in Jaffa near Tel Aviv, killing at least 4 and injuring 7, 2 terrorists killed. We were just getting those details in when suddenly we heard the sirens sound here in Jerusalem, and then reports of sirens across Israel. And when we looked up, we could see the lights of Israel's interceptor missiles from the Iron Dome streaking across the sky. That was followed by a series of explosions. Before we moved to shelter, we could hear people in the streets of Jerusalem cheering as the Iron Dome went to work. They were honking their horns. And this continued for well over an hour. Dozens, I would say, of interceptor missiles were fired, most of them moving in the direction of Tel Aviv. But now it seems that calm has settled, as I said, over the city. We are hearing from Israeli officials no reports of injuries so far, but undoubtedly Israeli officials, while they're saying they will respond to this attack from Iran, they are also surveying for any potential damage still. Lester.
Okay, Aaron, glad you guys are safe. Let me go back to Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube. Courtney, we've been talking about the level of U.S. military involvement in intercepting some of these missiles. We were able to see with our own eyes the video of some of these intercepts, but I understand these may have extended even farther from the camera's view.
Yeah, so remember where these missiles are coming from. Most of them, if not all of them, coming from Iran, probably even Western Iran. So just think about the map here. They would have flown over a number of different countries where the U.S. and allies have some missile defense and air defense systems. Now, that's one of the big questions that we're trying to get answered here is, were there some of these land-based systems like Patriot interceptors in some of these countries? Was the U.S. actually able to shoot down some of these missiles before they even got to our cameras? What we're seeing, what we've been watching here is these missiles have been exploding in the night sky, intercepted and taken down. Well, it's possible, like we saw in April, some of them didn't even make them that far. Now, remember, Lester, Iran has an enormous stockpile of ballistic and cruise missiles that they already have inherent to them. And frankly, that stockpile has only grown. They have various different systems. The way that the U.S. and others would have gotten a sense that this attack was even coming, we've been talking about it all morning here, the possibility of this imminent attack, is by watching the Iranians get some of these missiles loaded into some of the launchers, fire them up, get them ready on the launch pads. Once they actually launched some of that first wave of missiles, though, it would only be a matter of minutes before they would potentially impact. But because the U.S. and Israel and other allies have the ability to literally see those launches in real time, within seconds they will know that those missiles are in the air, they could have called on some of those intermediate systems in some of the countries before they even got to Israel to shoot some of those down. That's one of the big questions that we have. And again, we keep talking back to April, the most recent time that we saw something very similar to this, with hundreds of projectiles launched towards Israel from Iran. At that time, the U.S. was able to use some of those intermediate systems so that not all those projectiles even got into Israeli airspace before they were shot down out of the air. And I have to say, viewers need to remember that even if these missiles are shot down, depending on the kind of interceptor that's used to take them out, there could still be a tremendous amount of shrapnel and debris that will fall down below that could still threaten civilians, military installations, anything that is potentially in their path, Lester. And we did see that happen in April as well.
Yeah, Courtney, and I was struck by the fact that well in advance of these attacks, the U.S. was saying, hey, guess what? Iran is going to attack imminently. Are we to take that as a warning and a chance to perhaps deter the attack, basically saying, we see you and we know what you're about to do?
Yes, that is an excellent point, Lester, because there is a very real possibility that the reason the U.S. declassified the information about a possible imminent attack was in a hope that they would be able to deter Iran from actually going forward with it. And we've seen that happen in the past. You'll remember that before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was a tremendous amount of information that was declassified in the hopes that Russia wouldn't go forward with their invasion. Of course, they did. And we can see in this case, Iran still moved forward with their attack on Israel. Now, whether the declassification and providing this information by U.S. officials earlier today, that may have had some impact on second and third order attacks. We just don't know that yet. But as of now, it didn't deter what we saw here at least happen tonight, which was dozens and dozens of ballistic missiles were fired at Israel from Iran.
All right, Courtney, thank you. Let's go to the border area between Lebanon and Israel. Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent. Richard, you covered this part of the world for a very long time. Game it out for us. It appears the missiles have gone quiet for tonight. But what should we expect? What should the region be bracing for potentially?
Well, I think potentially for a war that could lead to a regime change in Iran. I think that it has the potential to escalate that far. Iran tonight was trying to show strength. It was trying to harm Israel. It was trying to kill Israelis, but it was also trying to show strength to its proxies, to its militia, to Hezbollah here in Lebanon, to Hamas in Gaza, to the people of the Arab world, that Iran and only Iran was strong enough to stand up to to Israel, stand up for the Palestinians. But instead of showing strength, it showed a tremendous amount of weakness. The U.S. warned it, saying, don't do this. We see what you're preparing. But instead of backing down, Iran launched these ballistic missiles that flew over the sky here in Lebanon, flew over the sky in Israel, and were shot down to almost no effect. So the question is, will Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been talking about regime change with increasingly vocal, increasingly strident tone for the last several weeks and several days, use this opportunity? I can hear Israel making the argument, we stopped the ballistic missiles tonight with the help of our allies, but what if those ballistic missiles had been tipped with nuclear weapons? This is exactly the kind of incident that Iran's enemies, and Iran has many enemies, chief among them Prime Minister Netanyahu, can capitalize on it. Instead of showing strength, did Iran fall into a trap and now will end up paying an enormous price for it?
And Richard, it also appears, though, that Iran doesn't necessarily want to turn this into a major, ongoing, large, region-wide battle. Andrea Mitchell and myself were part of an off-camera meeting with the Iranian president last week. Clearly, it didn't sound like a guy who wanted a global war over this.
Well, Iran has been saying that for a long time, and Iran has been trying to butter both sides of the bread. It wants to support Hamas. It wants to support the Palestinians. It wants to be seen as the only force in the Islamic world willing to stand up against Israel. But it doesn't want to cross that line and pick a direct war with Israel. That's why it's been fighting primarily through its proxies. And Iran has proxies in 5 countries. And the question is, will this, by having the ballistic missiles launched directly from Iran, change that calculation?
All right. Richard Engel, thanks. That concludes this NBC News special report. More ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and we'll have a lot more when I see you tonight for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Thank you for watching, and good day.